So, Eden, thanks so much for joining me on an N of One. You and I have been friends a very long time. I love your story, and I think, sharing the individual stories of people, even though we as scientists like to look at groups, there can be a lot to learn from an individual. And so, thanks so much for joining me today. I want to start at the beginning. Like, I want to talk about little Eden, like doing her thing. Tell me about, if I had met 10-year-old Eden, tell me about her. Like, was she as awesome and science geeky as you are now? Like, were you headed in a different direction? Like, bring me back.
Yeah, little Eden. Little Eden was a total nerd that liked to I just was consumed by books. I was like always carrying around like a stack of books with me everywhere. I was always, I think, fascinated by people. And yeah, a lot of my family, I just think they would even say now, like family friends are like, oh, Eden when she was little, just always carrying around books everywhere. I had little glasses, it wasn't contacts yet. So I was just going around with, back in the day too, I think they were just like not cute glasses. So just kind of had that going for me. But yeah, I just love to like hang out and I was always either sort of like within books and sort of like having that like, you know, immersing myself in like another world or I have two brothers, an older and a younger. And so like either, kind of we were all book nerds and either that or we were like outside making up like fantasy worlds and like sword fighting and all that stuff. I was definitely opposed to dresses as a kid because it didn't allow me to like climb trees and be as like nimble as the boys, so there was a lot of fighting against some of that in the beginning. And yeah, it's just a total nerd.
That's awesome. What if I'd asked 10-year-old Eden what she wanted to be when she grew up, what would she have told me?
um
Besides an elf, like,
yes.
leaving aside the elf magician career
Yeah.
track, what
Just
would little
definitely
Eden?
wanted my Hogwarts letter. Still disappointed. I think I'm trying to think if at that early. I know early on I really wanted to be like a lawyer. I like I was the troublemaker in the sense that I always pushed back on things. I was always trying to like negotiate what, oh, you have to go to bed at this time, you have to do this, like only, this much reading or stuff like that. So I'd always kind of be like, well, if I clean my bedroom, can I have an extra 20 minutes to stay up reading my book or something like that. So I feel like early on I was very interested in being a lawyer.
One of the really fun things about an N of one is because you start to have more than one of these stories, is you could start to pull apart some of these threads. That's why, population level science works. It is one of, something about that pushing back against the status quo does seem to be one of the defining characteristics of people who kind of go into applied work. Not shockingly, right? If you just want to understand the world without disturbing the balance, you could go be an academic. But applied people are all about poking it, and
Yeah, yes.
so it's not shocking. I think probably that like lawyer part of you comes out. Um, Talk me through that as you get older. So like now we're fast forwarding. You're a little more like in high school. Is it still sort of that like lawyer logic kind of place? Um,
Yeah, so I really loved school. I started getting really interested in more. I was always like a, total like raising my hand, doing the homework early, gotta get A pluses, tried to be really smart. I wasn't someone that like naturally caught on to things. One of my best friends from high school, she was like a genius, like skipping grades in math, and I was just like, oh, what's an algebra equation? So I really had to like study quite a bit in school. So I feel like when I got to high school, I was very interested in more. I was kind of between two routes. Like I got really fascinated by chemistry. And then I got equally fascinated by theater, and just kind of, the reading about, again, is kind of like from the younger stuff, like reading about people's lives and like these plays that were sort of like talking about society or people and things. And I had a really great theater program at my high school. We lucked out, and it was, you were able to, from freshman year to senior year, each year, take a different theater course. It kind of started at intro. We went theater 1, 2, 3. I did sort of a final practicum. And I feel like that experience, it became really researchy and analytical. I feel like my brain started like really to understand characters, why were they doing what they were doing, things like that. Chemistry, I really loved understanding chemical equations, which was sort of so other place. I think when it came down to it, I was like, do I go pre-med? Do I go to school for this? But I didn't like biology as much as I liked chemistry.
But you can see the sort of, again, you can see the behavioral science in those, right? There is a version of theater there that is very motivational, sort of promoting an inhibiting pressure personality sort of driven. But at the end of the day, scaled science is all about equations, right? We have to do things that replicate, right? And so, you can imagine a version of theater that might have led you more to like clinically sort of, individual one-on-one, each person is special and unique sort of
Mhm.
versions of science. And then there's like population science and sort of behavior change that I
Mhm.
think does make sense with the sort of chemistry bent. So you're torn between the
Sorry,
two
totally.
polarizations, right? And then, like, tell me about, when you went to St. Michael's, like, was it like, hey, I know you did sort of psychology and sociant, which is
Mhm.
like a great, social psyche kind of combination that has given us some of the best minds in applied behavioral science, including yours. Did you know instantly, like, hey, this is it, and I want to do that, or was it more of was there some flailing around in there that sort of got you there?
Definitely some flailing. I in high school had an experience where a friend, got really sick, went with the emergency room to her. And I was like, I'm here for you. I was thinking, maybe I'll be a doctor one day. And then they went to draw her blood and I just passed out. And anytime I had my own blood drawn, I was passing out. And I was just like, all right. This and my combination of not loving biology, it was like definitely not of that. So I went to St. Mike's originally, for theater, because they had such a great theater program. I had been between there and Hofstra, which also had a really cool on-site sort of playhouse. And I was thinking at that time, from all my time at the theater in high school, I was like the assistant director, or I was, in that my teacher had told me about like a role of a dramaturg, which is, basically the liaison between the playwright and the current director. They do all the research on all the renditions of it. What did the, sort of playwright interpretations, and how are all the characters? So I was really interested in becoming a dramaturg. I was like, this is it. I can research, I can understand the characters in here.
It's
And
the
then
nerdiest possible version of theater is to be the dramaturge. Like, I'm gonna be the nerdiest possible theater person. I love this.
Yeah, yeah. I was like, this is it. I'm gonna just, I loved like Samuel Beckett, like in like when I was like 17, reading like Pinter and Mamet and all these like things about, society and commentary on it. So I feel like I really loved that. But when I got into the program, and being more like immersed in it, it was very much like, this is a theater degree. So they were like, you gotta act, you got to take like stage like making classes, all this stuff. And I was like, this isn't it for me. Like, no interest in all this other realm. I just really like studying people. And I kind of had met with I'd met with my teacher, back from high school, and then I met with like, some of the just school folks and everything. And I was taking a psychology class, and I was like, this is where I feel like the most alive, is like I could study like the human brain and development and all that stuff forever. So I ended up switching my major to doing psych, and then after taking like some social anthro. Yeah. Oh,
So
stop
let's
mail.
drill in there. How'd you end up in the psych class in the first place? Right? Like you're taking intro psych. How'd you get kind of get there to begin with?
Yeah, so the program was like liberal arts. So I think, I kind of like taken it as one of the requirements that you had to take sort of a class in that sort of thresholds. So I think it was like the first semester of my freshman year, I was taking like psych alongside maybe like a theater 101 and stuff like that. And I was like, I'm really more in this psych land.
And so you knew pretty immediate that you'd come in very theater, but it sounds like it wasn't your senior year. You knew pretty early on, hey, I'm going to make a sort of psych transition.
Yeah, yeah, sort
And,
of ASAP. Yep.
and did you know that it was sort of more social psych, population level psych, as opposed to like clinical? Or was there a part of you that was like, hey, maybe this is like a clinical thing for me?
Yeah, so I feel like, I kind of went through like all my years. I was really interested in like I ended up taking more classes in the like sociology, taking anthropology, and so then I was like, you know what, let's add that majors in there. And it allowed me to also study abroad because a lot of the classes were a lot of anthro and sociology, things like that. So I was able to like, unlike some students that went to Italy and kind of took wine and cooking classes, I was, sort of in like peace education, and I took maybe one of the coolest classes ever. It was the history and sociology of the Italian mafia. So cool. But I still had thought I wanted to work in clinical psych, and I think a lot of the stuff stems from like, obviously your own experiences, your stuff like that. I really had wanted to work with kids in like foster care kind of setting. So I did do that for a bit of time in my senior year and then kind of going outside of school. And I was working with kids and I loved it, but I would go home crying every day just because I felt the system was so broken and, might be able to help someone. But then, in some cases, we were kind of returning them back to their home where it was like so broken and they were just sort of re experiencing all their traumas. So
So that's
then
what sort
it
of
was,
so you got actually on this clinical route, this individual route, and then through your experiences with individuals went, well, hell, if I don't fix the system, then I'm fighting a losing battle, right? Things regress towards whatever the system creates. So if I don't address the system,
yeah.
and it is interesting, I think a lot of clinician people who end up on the early clinical track sort of sometimes get to that place where they're like, oh no, it has to be systemic, or I just can't, I can't go after that.
Yeah,
Is
I
that
felt I wasn't making enough of an impact, for sure. Yeah, I was
and
struggling.
is that where the MPH came in? Is sort of the like, all right, I've tried the system out a little, I fought the individual battle. I'm like getting people to where they need to be, and then they're regressing because they go back into the same environment again. Is that what led you to the like where did the
Yeah.
MPH sort of go like, this is going to be a transitional point for me?
Yeah, I think it was like, a year or two, I'm like waitressing at like started out like, it was the same place I've been in college. I was at like a Friendlies, doing that life. Was applying to jobs, and I think it just like in like sort of that continuing to do kind of case management, stuff like that. And I would just meet with like these, overworked like folks that just I could just tell they were so tired, and like the system was like just a and I was like, this can't be it. And I'm glad I took time off because I think part of me had originally, been looking like, am I gonna just kind of work for a little bit or maybe go right into a master's program in clinic or, doing kind of more of that psych part. So I'm glad I didn't do that, got the experience. Note to anyone on here, go get experience.
So there was some part of you, there's some alternative universe where Eden goes off and gets like an MFT or something and like gets a side E and goes off down this clinical route.
Mhm.
But that your exposure to the system was the thing that, at least in this universe, sort of pushed you over uh, in this other direction. As you
Yeah. Yeah.
as you went into an MPH, what did you think? If I had asked, now we're into like early 20s, Eden. If I'd asked early 20s, Eden, like, okay, you're gonna get this MPH, and then
Yeah,
what?
so I think in the beginning, I thought I would, I feel like I think I was in the like, designing experiments, doing all that, like kind of like how can we it was like change on a bigger level. What had helped me get there was one of my like mentors from school, and public health hadn't been like a major at my school at that time early on. I feel like it was kind of becoming it was still a thing that I felt kind of was reserved in most cases to grad schools. So I didn't really know about it. So like kind of hearing about it, I was like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And I think, yeah, I was like, I'm going to design experiments, and that'll be it, like massive public health campaigns and things like that.
And so you kind of went into an MPH kind of knowing, hey, behavioral science, whether it was called that or not, right? Like it is this large scale health behavior change that was interesting to you. Was that common in your MPH? Was it supported? Were you kind of were you like the one student that wanted to do this, or did you feel like you had a community? Tell me a little bit about sort of like how that folded in.
The one student to rule them all. No, yeah, so so what was great is I had interviewed, like I was, I'm coming out of undergrad, I was like a total nerd. I was like, maybe now I want to go to like an Ivy League. I was kind of like stuck on this idea of like a Yale, Harvard, Brown, and
So
BU
you're a
had
good
like,
Bostonian then. You were like, all right,
yeah, let's go to
one of
one of
these
those.
Boston Ivy gray, brick things.
Yeah, like get me in with all the nerds. And so I'd interviewed at all these schools and everything, sat in on classes and did all that. And I felt like the programs at like Yale and Brown were more on the I'm like biostatistics, epidemiology routes, like really deep kind of um science, a little like I wasn't into really like as much of that. I felt, I just was still like, how do I connect with the people more and do all that? And the program at BU, what I loved is, first of all, where it's located, it's right next to a safety net hospital in a very like rough part of town. And so the focus was really about how can we work with the community and get things done. And it just like, this, like, we can't just sit in our ivory towers and like talk about it. And the students at one program versus the other at those schools, they felt so competitive and like weren't into helping each other. They were just like researching. And when I went to BU, it was just like the combination of the professors and students that were already like, if you want to learn more about this, stuff like that. And they actually had one of their concentrations was social and behavioral sciences. So I was like, okay, this really feels in line with more of what I want to do, and was really a difference from what I had seen in some of the other programs.
Yeah, I think that competition piece is interesting, right? Like, a lot of the very sciencey, just because the nature of sort of science academia has become very much like, hey, can I say a thing that's more interesting than everyone else, right? The comparison is the everyone else piece. And,
Yeah.
applied is really like, I'm in competition with the environment. I'm in competition with the world, right? I'm in competition with impression
Right.
and anything that
Right.
creates negative outcomes. Um, so was there a lot of like, 2% of the kids are taking the BeSci concentration, or is it popular? Like, tell me a little bit about that.
I feel like it was Um, I feel like it was sitting more with like where the global health track had been. I think people were definitely more in like the health management kind of track. They had like a pharmacy certificate, and then biostats and epidemiology. I feel like a lot of folks kind of went into more of those. So I'd say the BSci and global health though is where I found like quirkier people like me.
You found your people.
Yeah.
So you graduate, get through the MPH, and then you had been doing some consumer engagement stuff at Healthcare for All, right? Sort of during
Yeah.
the master's sort of lens. Tell me a little bit about sort of like, all right, you go out into the job market, and then you end up at Eliza. Like, how did you end up there?
Yeah, so I feel like two things in school like kind of like led me there. I had taken a really cool like sort of more like UX, UI, health communications course. And someone had actually like on, they had kind of had like a job like list, not more of a company list of like companies in the area inside sort of outside of that were doing that kind of work. And Eliza was on there. So it was kind of the first I had heard about them. But I had taken this like mHealth course that was all about designing, actual interventions. We ended up designing, and you worked with a partner organization. So I was working with like USA and FHI 360, which are sort to develop a app on like sexual and reproductive health for folks in Tanzania. And so specific. But with that, I ended up, we were sort of supposed to build it on this platform that we were kind of learning in the thing, but I felt like it wasn't, those were really more practitioner focused, and the client really was more, person focused, and like the people and how are they going to use it. So I learned how to like make an app, do all this stuff. I ended up consulting with them sort of long term, going out and like presenting to their org. And I just really love that. I think I really love working on like client problems and working with clients, kind of having those aha moments and things like that. So I kind of learned about Eliza, and then I was interviewing there and out with Kaiser in California. And little Eden me was like, not little, I wasn't little, but I was like, maybe a little poor at that point, getting out of all the school and stuff. I was like, I don't think I can afford going cross country right now and living in an expensive area. Because I ended up kind of staying home and commuting up to Boston for school and stuff, and still, working 3 or 4 odd jobs to kind of pay the bills. So I ended up, yeah. I then so Eliza was I just loved it. As soon as I went in, they were kind of talking the same things. How do we sort of behavior change? How do we get members to do things that they're not doing now? And I just, again, I was like, this is it.
So there's an alternative universal Eden out there somewhere that makes the move to California and goes to work uh, for Kaiser. Would you have been doing similar behavior change oriented stuff at Kaiser?
Yeah, it was going to be similar. I think it was maybe a little more analytics side of things, which, I think that would have been really cool as well. Because that's like an area that I've like sort of learned as a side to complement what I'm doing in my work. But that would have been like more of the focus on that side, but also, designing and implementing campaigns and stuff. So yeah, it would have been a little similar, I think, just a little less on like the content and communication side.
And so you get to Eliza, and what was surprising to you? Was, where did it defy your expectations, and where did it meet your expectations, right? Where was it like, ah, yes, like this is what I thought I would be doing? And where were you like, oh man, this is really different than what maybe I had expected coming out of my master's?
Yeah, so I think like, the combination of like starting there and then my experience at Healthcare for All, just like seeing how many issues there were with the system, how hard it was to get insurance, all that stuff, access issues. I think I was then surprised by like sort of the um, other side of it, of then working with health plans that were so risk averse in how they communicated to members, and not necessarily, so for some it was, because of regulations and, things by CMS and stuff, they're just trying to check the box in terms of what they say, not really concerned with like the behavior change angle. So I think what was great is that I was exposed to so many clients, that I had some that were really willing to like more test things, try different ideas and stuff like that. But there were some that were just, we just like they, the language would stay complicated. They had like they wouldn't let us kind of like divert from a lot of the things that were obviously creating barriers and friction for their members.
So what I'm hearing is it's not part of the hard part wasn't changing the behavior of individuals, it was changing the behavior of the clients, right? To even allow you to do that test. There's been a lot of conversation in the last couple of weeks over the holiday, as behavioral scientists have been talking about like what's hard about being a behavioral scientist. And usually it really, people's stories have not emerged as like, oh, the behavior change behavior change of the end user is not the hard part. It's getting people to let you test something, getting people to let you take the risk, right?
Mhm.
On
Mhm.
behavior change, let you run that experiment because there's always the risk it won't work, right?
Right. Right.
And that's how you end up with 80,000 flu shot campaigns that sound exactly the same and probably don't do all that much, right? Rather than sort of like pushing that envelope. Back to
Yes.
Eden, the
Yeah.
rebellious 10-year-old
Yes.
potential lawyer, right? Like she's like, no, I want to try stuff. I want to get the extra 20 minutes of reading time if I clean my room, right? I want to push the
Yes. Yes.
boundaries.
And I was, and I feel like, we had like, I feel like at any point a company's gonna have best practices and things like that. And I was just always like, what can we do different? And I think, from like someone who might do a master's of actual, just like behavioral science and versus, public health with behavioral science focus, I think like that set me up as a good foundation. But I graduated in 2016 for my master's. It wasn't what I know behavioral science to be now. So a lot of what I think kind of made Eden more behavioral science was like self-taught. I just was such an avid reader. Like I was just nerding out at work, asking if I could, buy more books, add a library to the thing, learning about, I feel like more of the marketing side and behavioral science, behavioral economics, kind of the whole umbrella. It's when I took rational labs, and originally my title had just been health engagement designer, which might actually be like a coolest title I've ever had. But I was like, I think we really need to establish sort of a behavioral science practice here, like more of a sort of like studio for us to collaborate and things like that. So I really pushed until I kind of got like a lead behavioral science role and kind of started stirring up all of that at Eliza and HMS.
And so before we pivot over to mPulse, because I do want to talk about the awesome work that you're doing now, but let's stay at HMS for a little bit. Talk to me about founding a behavioral science team and sort of getting them to be willing to make those things. What worked, what didn't work, where was their enthusiasm, where were their barriers? Like, take me back to the painful times that were 2019 as you're trying to get them to agree to do this thing.
Yeah. So I feel like once I got the story right, which I think with behavioral science, it's like how do you simplify it? How do you make it make sense? Lower the perceived effort of like starting to think this way. And so I think that I like the initial friction was like, okay, the way you're explaining it now, it's like it was like experiments and all that. Everyone's like, that's gonna be so much time. And it was like the perceived effort was high. So it was like, how do I reframe this to be a little, simpler? And so even just starting out by how do we teach up the team to think this way and think in a new way about, because I was a team of, a lot of sort of health engagement designers and things like that. So how do we all start thinking this way? And then how do we even get like the org to start thinking a little more this way? So we thankfully had from folks that had kind of been before me, and then I had inherited when one of them left, sort of a design studio. We called it Headstorm for the health engagement design team. And it was really like a brainstorming, learning session stuff. So I kind of started taking that over and teaching all kinds of behavioral science workshops. And that, I think just behavioral science, it's like, it's it's something that I think once people start learning about it and having those aha moments, it wasn't hard to push like, oh, this makes sense. Oh, we should be applying it. I think the real struggle then became again hitting the wall with potentially clients or technology sort of restraints of like, we don't have the capability to do that. So it became I was working a lot closer with the product org to make some of those things possible. So my role was kind of like really, yeah, I was moving around a lot.
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things that I feel like I heard in there was, initially the barrier felt like it's too hard, right? It's not that people are bought off on the value, it's bought off on the like, well, running an experiment is risky. Like that's and there is a sort of promoting pressure to training. It's hard to say no to training, right? Like, and if you are a good trainer, you can get people excited and you can find a coalition of the willing rather than being the singular voice that's trying to do this thing. And
Mm.
you did have some clients at the time who were pushing on this, right? Clover Health, where I was the chief behavioral officer, right? We used Eliza, and I was doing any of the things we wanted to do. Come on, folks. And so there,
Yeah,
there was some
yes.
client pressure. But talk to me about how did you? So you get it internally lined up. You start training some people up. You've got a lab. You're doing the thing. How did you start to convince your first clients to be willing to take on experimentation?
Yeah, so I feel like it was, I think we got like trying to think of like the some of the origin. I think it was that we had some clients that were like yourself that like kind of came with a little bit of that interest themselves. So it's like kind of learning, the space, and instead of I had designated clients, but if there were sort of ever whisperings of like, oh, this client's interested in something new, I was often the one brought in. And so I would, it was in those kind of conversations that I was then able to start, okay, let's run this versus this, let's try out this. At that point, HMS wasn't there because they had acquired Eliza. Their work was really focused on like IVR. So just really advanced, voice recognition. I mean, now I think that that's kind of what a lot of the systems can do, but at the time they had been kind of singular in that. So I was designing these like complicated phone pathways. They weren't really doing SMS, and they were, somewhat within the email space. So I think, getting folks to try out different things on some of those other channels was like another thing to learn. Got Cooper in the background here
I
trying
know
to
he said, I want to get on the bed, but I'm not
get
tall
you on
enough.
the bed. I'll get you on the bed, buddy. Okay, we're one intermission. Here we go. Coop's on the bed. Um, so I think it was those early ones, and then I think it was like sort of a snowball from there of like, okay, we have some case studies, we have some actual, hey, this worked kind of stuff, and being able to use that to kind of sell up the
So part of
stuff.
it's this coalition of it's not about I have to pick the biggest, sexiest project, right? It's not about promoting pressure. It's just about inhibiting pressure. Oh, you're willing to do something different? Great, let's try something.
Yes.
You're willing to push. Doesn't even really matter what it is. I'll take anything. And one
Yes.
of the things you said in there that I want to highlight that I think is so important is that even when you have an assigned workload, even when you have a set of projects or a set of clients that are yours, sometimes it's easier to sort of take a coalition of the willing that maybe isn't even in your remit. They're not in your client base, but you're sort of, Samir at EY and I were talking about this, or not EY, at Parthenon and I were talking about this recently about, just sort of, they don't, even if it's not in air quotes, your client, right?
Mhm.
Sort of pushing into the like, well, but they're willing to try somebody. And so if they're not even my client, but they're willing to try something, I will make them my client.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I just kind of became like, I definitely more like consultative and kind of strategisty. And I was like the person kind of brought in for the stuff. And then I was kind of building the team to like also think that way as well. So I wasn't like sort of singular. But when it came to, here are recommendations, especially when it came to, a lot of these companies just once they have something running, they don't want to change it. And so how do you also have this like, as we all would think, you're iterating and you're improving upon like the results that you saw, not just like it's like, we can always try to do better. And so I think that it was at that too where we would do QBRs and things like that. And I would latch on to some of those as like, let's use this as a time to propose something new and a change.
Yeah. And it sounds like you also developed a bit of a reputation, right? By teaching the classes and things, people knew, if you hear keyword A, B, or C, go find Eden, right?
Yes.
And so, being that go-to person for something really can help people, helping people understand this is when you pick up the phone and call me
Mhm.
really can help. What, you were at HMS, post acquisition from Eliza, and that was a long chunk of your career. What made you decide, hey, it's time to look at something different? Are you one of those folks who kind of always has an eye on the market and mPulse sort of came up? Was it like you had an experience and you were like, I've capped out and now it's time to change? Like what created that transitional moment for you?
Yeah, I'd say it was kind of a combination. I feel like I in the last like year or so at that with that kind of whole group, I wanted to, like, when HMS came along, I was like, I'm gonna give them a chance. They have a lot of stuff. They were, they let us do like a hackathon. Like, I was interested in like at least giving it a try, but I didn't love the idea of having like this all of a sudden became a giant org. But I was like, I'll try it out. But then it was in the process of then getting acquired by another company, where I feel like just all the fates aligned. And so I had started like probably that last year kind of going on LinkedIn more because I realized it was such a place for resources and connections in behavioral science, because I was someone at the company that, like around this podcast, like an N of one of kind of like behavioral science, trying to learn, trying to shape that and stuff. I didn't really have mentors, or, I didn't really know how do I grow next. So I like kind of dove into LinkedIn. That's when I just started like, hey, I'm reading this, I'm going to share it. So I started, I think, kind of starting to accrue some followers, not out of like an intent to do so, but just that folks found it relevant. And it was actually mPulse that had reached out to me. I think I was like kind of out looking for stuff, because I felt like, we were still primarily focused on IVR and phone calls. And I'm like, everyone is texting now. We can't, like, we need to go into more of these other digital channels. We can't stay here. And so I felt like in order to be able to innovate in a new way, I kind of had gotten bored by just doing like really IVR phone call trees design. So it was like we were going to get acquired again. I wanted to do more, and mPulse had seen my LinkedIn and reached out.
So you started to kind of create your own community of practice, right? You hit on something that's very key for a lot of people is, for still today,
Mhm.
the majority of behavioral scientists, you're going to be an N of one, right? You're
Mhm.
probably going to be the first hire. You're probably going to argue for that department. You're probably going to be the one pushing the envelope.
Mhm.
And we all want to learn from somebody, right? And so it is nice to be surrounded by people. And I want to, we got to make sure we carve out time because you have created an interesting community of practice around women in behavioral science. So I want to make sure that we get a chance to talk about that, which, because I know it's a place we both have some shared passion. So it wasn't actually job search that brought you to LinkedIn, but more of the like, how do I create a community around myself? How do I learn? And then through doing that, right, opportunities sort of, manifested. When you first talked to mPulse, was it like, did you know from the first moment, oh yeah, like these are the folks and I'm ready? Did it take some convincing? Like, talk to me about that transitional decision making about, because you're leaving something really stable that you've been at for a long time. You're known, it's a known quantity. They respect you, they like you. What made you, how'd you get comfortable with the risk?
Yeah, I'd say so. The space of like sort of patient or member engagement, kind of all the stuff that I was in, I feel like it's, and especially, it's kind of small. There's like a decent amount of competitors and stuff, but mPulse was like a competitor. And so a lot of folks during the transition to HMS had jumped ship. Some had ended up other places. And then around also found themselves at mPulse. So I had two of my colleagues that had been at mPulse that had been at ELISA that were at mPulse and were gonna be on the team I was working with. So that was like, okay, I have some comfort already. It's not that like you're not gonna know anyone, things like that. And they also had known about like what I've been doing at ELISA, had witnessed sort of the studios and things like that. And so they were kind of vouching for me on in that way. But my first call, like my first interview, I don't know if I had to do a recruiter first, but with what would become my boss, who was Paul Feiner, big shout out, my homie. I feel like I knew almost ASAP. I felt like I just was getting a vibe from him, as a manager, as someone that's like, this person is going to push you, but also like motivate you and inspire you. He just had like that kind of, we're trying to do new things here. You seem like really talented. It was just that nice combination. And I had started to feel at ELISA like I was almost bumping heads with the leadership I had, in terms of like, I've kind of outgrown you, or a little bit of competition. Like, it was like my ideas were being used. It's just like it kind of became a a bad spot. And so to kind of feel like, oh, this person seems like they'd be amazing boss and I'd really learn, that was like so important to me.
And you mentioned also that, they were up for something new, right? You
Yeah.
had all these experiences of, I have to convince people to want to do this. I have to get, and that's a part of any behavioral scientist's life, is convincing people of a thing, but it can get quite exhausting. And so it can be a breath of fresh air when someone's saying like, oh no, like we already pre-want the thing that you
Yes.
have. Um, in founding BeSci.io, and doing all of the internal work that we do at companies, we don't sell any clients, right? Clients come to us. You're sort of a universe of one. You only really come to us if you know you want to create a behavioral science team. We don't have to convince you to create one. And it is
Right.
so different than working as an internal behavioral scientist, where often so much of your time is pushing against these headwinds. So it sounds like part of what brought you to mPulse was just a reduction in the obviously an inspiring manager, obviously some great promoting pressures, obviously the move to text, which is something that you want, but like also just some reduction in like, I'm not going to spend all of my time selling this.
Yes, yes. It's like these guys are open to it and they have a platform where we can maybe do more of it and stuff like that, because they had sort of the NLU and things that would allow for, I feel like a lot was missing at when I was at, HMS.
And so you transitioned into mPulse. Tell me a little bit about, the first third of 60/90 at sort of like, how do now you know yourself as a behavioral scientist, you know what it is, you've got some reasonable training, right? You've got a community of practice around you, which, when you started Eliza might not have been true, right? So Eliza, you sort of grew into a behavioral scientist. Now you're landing as a behavioral scientist. So first of all, were you the only one? Like, or, were you sort of like the hire?
So yeah, so when I came in, they were hiring for an engagement strategist. So that is what I came in as. But they wanted it to be someone that had more of the behavior change, behavioral science background, and really to like grow that up. Because I think, we were talking a lot about doing it, but but it wasn't, he didn't feel like it was as in practice as it could be. So like, establishing just like, this is some of our behavior change best practices, things we could talk about, so a lot of it in the beginning, Cooper, can we not bark at the wall? A lot of it in the beginning was just kind of coming up with some of those basic things. And so I was engagement strategist, went to, I think, sort of senior strategist, and then eventually pushed for like the director of behavioral science part, because I felt like, we're a company that's really talking about doing this. Let's like make it kind of real and stuff like that. So I think that in the beginning, it was a lot of teaching the org again, which I felt like I love this. I could teach behavioral, like that is maybe where I'll end up one day, is like teaching behavioral science. I don't necessarily want to be in total academia, but I love like the aha moments and like the joy. Like I feel like that I really love. So I was in like definitely my happy place there. And then it was sort of, how do we come up with practices and ways to really employ this in like our designs and our solutions, and just think differently about like sort of their whole current process they had for working on like content and things.
Got it. That makes a ton of sense. So you come in, you're doing a bunch of teaching. Same question as before. What surprised you? What had what questions do you wish you'd asked in advance or wish you'd known in advance? And those can be positive and negative directions, right? What was a negative surprise where you were like, oh man, this is harder than I thought it would be? What was a positive surprise? So let's go negative first. Like, what was a barrier you didn't expect?
Yeah, so I guess one thing was like just the difference in capabilities. So I had come from a company that had such sophisticated IVR, and then and like no SMS, and then I was going to a company that was more SMS but not really IVR as much capability. So that shift in like how I designed and thought was really new, of like, oh, all the things that you couldn't do with SMS back here, you can do now. So like, how do I change my brain to like think about that like whole new opportunity? But then your IVR, you're more limited. And so like learning up on that. So I think, platform to platform. And since we've just like really invested more in IVR, because we know that's still a place where a lot of consumers are gonna engage and everything like that. But I think in the beginning it was, sort of seeing where are all the places that even from lessons learned from, being at a competitor that you can pull over and sort of apply as like initial sort of check the boxes, here's all things we should consider for our product and things we should do.
So in your
Um,
mind, more of this is, in your mind, you're like, it doesn't really matter if it's SMS or IVR. And then you kind of get there and go, oh, damn, right? Like each of these is really their own animal. What was a positive surprise for you? What was the thing that you were pleasantly, you hadn't expected, but has turned out, unexpectedly positive?
Um, I think the most positive had probably been the management. I think I fell into a team, a boss who had a boss that was so supportive of all of it. I was immediately kind of thrown into like speaking at the client conference they had, like the maybe the same month that or a month after I joined. So like sort of immediately taking all the things that I was, sort of working on and like sharing it with clients, getting all that. The first like that year had been about like interesting, like it was maybe engagement trends, and then we started to really get into like sort of focused topics for the client conference. So the next year was behavioral science. So I just kind of felt like, I was able to work on like creating a workshop, creating cards, things for our clients. I just felt like that to me for my career made all the difference to just feel like you have a boss who's like, I really believe in the thing you do. I don't totally understand it. I want to learn more, but I believe in it. And I think, sometimes with behavioral science, same as like you're going to fight with your clients about like the importance of it and considering it. Sometimes you're fighting with, your own internal teams about like, this is really important. It will make a substantial difference if we just even frame a message differently. And so to have sort of the support from leadership of like, balls in your court design.
That's awesome. And what, if you were giving advice to a younger behavioral scientist about a question they could ask in an interview that would let them know if they had a good boss,
Mm.
what, is there a diagnostic that would have let you know, hey, that this support is really going to come down the pipeline for me?
Yeah, I'd say something that's really interested and not really brought up enough is like, what is like, like what is the development plan, the learning and development opportunities as an employee? Some teams put a budget for that so people can attend conferences, can, buy books, take courses, things like that. Because you're like in most cases you're not necessarily, it's not going to maybe be your boss that is the one teaching you, but are they really willing to invest in you learning and growing? And I feel like that was something with Paul that, he would sort of admit his areas where he was learning from me and things like that, but also where, I would sort of, hey, I want to try this or I want to take this and being able to do that. Otherwise I just like with it, it was unfortunately kind of a gut feeling. It just was like, this is a kind person. Like I'm vibing and they're a lot like the interview was equally kind of focused on like what do you want? And I think that that's really important in a interview is like, this isn't just about what you bring to us and what you're going to do for us, but also how do we help with your career?
Yeah, I think it's really important, especially when people are junior. You don't think you have any
Mhm.
leverage, and so you see it as very extractive. But it is very dyadic, right? It is a relationship. There's a give and take to any job, and asking questions that would help you arrive at a good dyad ends up becoming really important. And you've talked a lot about sort of education and community, and whether you came to LinkedIn, et cetera. Talk to me about sort of leaning in towards this community of women in behavioral science that have really come together in a great way, and how that kind of came about. You're at mPulse, like what made you say, hey, I want a more formal community rather than just the informal chats?
Yeah, I just I started like loving LinkedIn. I think, grew on there, was starting to connect with all these great folks and was, sort of always was, as we do get like requests from folks like, "Oh, let's have a coffee chat. Let's do this." Like, let's connect. And I still was, you know, at a company where I was like sort of, the N of one again. So it was like, how do I continue to grow, continue to learn? How do I learn from other behavioral scientists that might not even be in the healthcare space? Like, how do I widen my mind to think of, I might be in a really heavily regulated, compliant area, but are there aspects of like someone working in fintech with cool ideas that could like, be watered down, or how could we translate it, study it? Does it work in healthcare or something like that? So it was like taking calls with, just women that were behavioral scientists kind of all over, obviously taking calls with men as well. But I think it was in conversations with one or two of those women. One was Stephanie Weldy, who works closely with BJ Fogg, and another was Heather McKee, who's in Ireland and kind of is her own consultant in that space. And we were just like, we were getting together for chats, and we were like, I think more women would enjoy getting together for chats. And so it kind of just thought, maybe it's something that we start, and, we all bring like something interesting that we read recently, because it was like at first like, oh, what are you reading? What are you listening to? All that kind of stuff. How do you stay up to date in this field? Things are kind of constantly shifting. You can't have eyeballs on all of it. But what are the things that have been really impactful that you found that have made a difference? So I think then we were like, what the heck, let's just try to make a community. And there is another women in behavioral science group on LinkedIn, so I think that one's really great, and that one's been growing. I think though at first that one had been not necessarily as much having events, and I think they've been doing more of that, and I think that that's great, because I didn't just want to join another LinkedIn group or create another LinkedIn group that was just simply a group where people could like put posts, because I didn't see that had ever been that effective. I really wanted it to be a place where like the idea that I just kept saying was like cross pollination. How can we grow from each other's ideas and learn from each other, and be exposed in that way? And it's turned into something, yeah, lovely. We're at like 350 members now. We have folks from all over the world. We've had such interesting talks from members and things that have really helped people advance their careers, and be connected, like whether you're kind of at the start of your career, or kind of really well into it.
Yeah, I love web. I love this women engaged in behavior. Let's talk about the gender lens though, because you were like men too. There as a second, right? I have great conversations. You and I are great friends. Obviously, I'm not a woman, right?
Mhm.
Like, I don't identify that way. Tell me a little bit about what you think the gender lens brings to behavioral science.
Yeah, so I think that for it wasn't necessarily we need to do it this way. I think it was just kind of like, how do we make this a little more niche? And it had really started from a group of women. And so we're like, how do we maybe keep that going? And I think at the time when we had created it, it was maybe when the feeling was, women were a little less represented. Every time you talked about books or things that were written in behavioral science, it's all by men. And how do we kind of create a platform where we're raising up women in the space and try and help them through imposter syndrome? Like, that's kind of a constant talk for us is, everyone here is doing amazing things. Sometimes we have presentations by folks that are things that they're like trying to think about offering in their own consulting and stuff like that. And so it's, how do we really shine a light on them to empower them to like, branch out more in their own life and their space and stuff.
Yeah, it is interesting to your point that, so many great behavioral scientists, applied behavioral scientists, Steph Habif and Amy Bucher and you and other people, we have so many great women, but
Mhm.
like, you know, in the general populace, right, many of the more prominent evangelists have ended up, being men, the Jason Reyes of the world, right? You know, uh, uh, many of the academics that people look to, like Dan Ariely, right, have often been men. Uh,
Mhm.
and so I think it is important that we recognize that actually the majority of the senior applied behavioral scientists are in fact women. We just have not managed to kill the patriarchy enough to show that. So I'm really glad that comes out. Thanks so much for spending some time with me today. I always love it when we get a chance to chat and to spend time together. And I think it's so important to, you know, you come together. I'm a little older than you, right? And you represent a period of time where, when I started applied behavioral science, stuff happened. I was talking about the fact that like that wasn't even, those weren't words at the beginning of our careers, and you've really
Right.
hit this golden place where like, by the time you got to your master's degree, there was some notion of this, at least within your vertical, right? Within health, that this was going to be a thing, and you've really gotten an amazing chance to lead. And so thanks so much for spending some time with me and sharing your knowledge with the folks who come and watch these things. And I'm looking forward to watching your continuing journey and being friends. And I know you have some important things coming up in your personal life soon. I hope those go wonderfully. There's nothing like a wedding to talk about behavioral science. A lot of choices
Yes,
going on
how I
there.
designed that.
It's a very intentionally designed space for behavioral scientists. No one plans a wedding quite like a behavioral scientist, I think. So I'm very excited for the things that are going on in your life. Thanks so much for spending some time with me, and I'll see you on down the road.
Yeah, this is great. Great to be connected. And yeah, as folks listen to this, if I can ever be sort of a, voice, a help, open, people connect to me on that LinkedIn, and be happy to kind of help anyone that's navigating all this.
And the name of the behavioral, I said the name, but I want to make sure that we close with it. What is the name of the behavioral science community that you run for women is?
Yeah, the web, Women Engaged in Behavior.
It's awesome. Eden, take it easy.
You too. Bye.
Yeah.